Hi, I'm Steve Wood, and welcome to Luke 21. Let's look at some biblical prophecy. Today, we are looking at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, another important chapter in an important book of the Bible, Thessalonians, talking about biblical prophecy. And we're looking at the first two verses in chapter 5. St. Paul writes, "But as to the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need to have anything written to you, for you yourselves know well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night." We just added another term to the collection of events that occur at the second coming. And this makes 5 terms we've looked at. We've talked about the rapture, the parousia, which also means coming. So parousia, coming. It's also the time of the resurrection of the body. And then today, the day of the Lord. Now, there are some prophetic schemes that mix these up like spaghetti, and they're saying, oh, these are different events and this and that. These are 5 different expressions of the same cluster of events that occur at the second coming of Christ. And the main point of these 2 verses is actually quite simple. Thief in the night means that Christ's coming will be a big surprise. It will be unpredictable. It will be without warning. And particularly those who are asleep, and that's not talking about getting your 8 hours rest at night. It's talking about those who are in a spiritual slumber will not at all expect what's coming. But being a thief in the night, if a thief was going to come to your home and invade in the middle of the night, he wouldn't send you a text before you went to bed announcing what time he would be coming in the middle of the night. No, part of the deal of being a thief is that it's a surprise attack. You don't expect it. And the second coming of Christ is unpredictable. Jesus himself said in Matthew 24 and verse 36, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but the Father only." And it's very interesting. I've spent actually a fair amount of time studying the false predictions about the second coming of Christ through most every century of church history, Protestant and Catholic. It's nonstop. Here's a collection of books that I own. These books are filled with false predictions that have been made through the ages. And I just can't understand, because Jesus said, no one knows the day or the hour, and yet these books are filled with people, and some of them really good people, but they crossed the line and started giving dates regarding the second coming of Christ. We can't know this. When I was in the Jesus movement in Southern California, Hal Lindsey, Chuck Smith were alluding to Israel being founded as a nation in 1948, generations about 40 years, so that's 1988. They believe that there'll be 7 years of tribulation before the second coming in 1988, so that means the rapture will come in 1981. And, it didn't. And a lot of people were expecting it. A lot of people were disappointed. Tim LaHaye has been making false predictions about the second coming of Christ. And Tim LaHaye's the theologian behind the Left Behind novels and movie. He started making these predictions way back around the time of World War I, and kept going right through the 20th century. And people don't seem to get that you can't predict the time of the second coming, the date. And not just to pick on Protestants for this. In the years leading up to the year 2000, there was a Catholic priest, Father Gobi, made predictions about, the years like from 1998 through the year 2000 would be the second coming of Christ. He was a false prophet too. And yet thousands of Catholics bit into this. And just know that you can't make that type of prediction. Here's the best advice ever regarding those who are tempted to make date predictions for the second coming of Christ. And it's from St. Augustine, The City of God, Book 18. In vain do we then attempt to compute definitely the years that may remain to this world, when we may hear from the mouth of the truth, that's Christ, that it is not for us to know this. But on this subjects, he puts aside the figures of the calculators. See, this is that people were doing in my Jesus movement days. Okay, 1948, add 40, that's 1988, subtract 7, that's 1981. That will be the rapture. 1988 will be the second coming, and it all proved wrong. So he says, puts aside the figures of the calculators and orders silence, who says it is not for you to know the times which the Father has put in his own power. Now, St. Augustine's advice was so good that St. Thomas Aquinas quoted St. Augustine. I just read to you in his Summa, in question 77 of that 5th volume in the collections of the Summa. He said, in addition to St. Augustine's quote, "For what he refused to tell the apostles, he will not reveal to others." So someone who claims to have a vision or a word from Mary, somebody who claims to go to heaven and comes back, somebody who claims to have a word of prophecy, that they know something that when the apostles asked Jesus, Jesus said, it is not for you to know this. And if the apostles didn't know it, it's nothing but presumption for someone to make that claim. So I'll just tell you something right up front here about Luke 21. If I ever give you a date, turn this channel off, never, ever come back and listen to another word I ever say. You just can't make dates about the second coming. The temptation comes, and this is how good people are falling into this trap. There are turning points in history. War is one of those turning points. And now in our modern world, we have world wars. Famines are another turning point, pestilences, persecutions. And when you have a conjunction of a number of these events, it's very tempting to start making dates about the second coming. I personally believe that we are another major turning point in history, but we can't assume to know any dates based on that. But there's a delicate balance here, a very delicate balance. In 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 4, just a few verses down from where we were reading, St. Paul begins with, but, okay, the coming of Christ is going to be like a thief in the night, but he says, you, Christians, are not in the darkness, brethren, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness. So let us then not sleep, means be staying awake spiritually as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. So there's a contrast. And St. Paul is saying you can't predict the date. It's going to be a surprise, especially, it'll be a shock for those who are not spiritually awake. Yet, he says, the Christians aren't in darkness. We're in the day. There should be a certain level of awareness. And this comes to what I consider a very difficult balancing act. It was very difficult for me working through this passage. And it's this: there are no definite predictions. There are no definite date settings and all this type of thing. And that's exactly what St. Augustine said. But notice he goes, in vain then do we attempt to compute definitely the years that remain. In other words, he's saying fixing a date, announcing it, that's wrong. Jesus warned against that. But then St. Augustine said in Book 20 of the City of God, he said the following. I guess I'll read it first, his quote. It's a little difficult to understand first time through, and I'll give you my summary of it. He said this: some who till then shall be without, non-Christians, shall become firm in the faith that they have hitherto rejected. They just weren't neutral, they were rejecting the Christian faith. And mightily to conquer the devil, even though he is unbound. Revelation 20, verses 7 through 8. God's grace aiding them to understand the Scriptures, in which, among other things, there is foretold that very end which they themselves see to be arriving. Now, what is St. Augustine saying? Well, he said, first of all, you can't set dates. You can't know the definite time or even year when this is going to occur. But he says when things get increasingly evil towards the end of the age, that unbelievers, when they see what's happening in the world, even people who have rejected Christ or maybe walked away from the faith of their youth because they see through the Scriptures, the grace of God is going to open up their minds to see in the Scriptures what's happening, and they're going to become fervent disciples of Christ. This is perhaps the grand opportunity for evangelism. And think, okay, Satan's making his major move. He's bringing the world into darkness, into spiritual sleep and deception, and leading many into apostasy. But that's not the end of the story. There's a few other chess moves going on here, is that in these Scriptures, and we're not talking about date setting, because people who set dates actually undermine the words of Christ and cast derision upon anybody who wants to teach biblical prophecy from a non-nutty viewpoint. And basically, it creates people thinking, oh, second coming of Christ will never happen. It will happen. It will come. But before that happens, there can be a grand opportunity for those who are without to become fervent disciples of Christ. And that's why my goal, when St. Augustine says God's grace aiding them to understand the Scriptures, this is exactly what we're trying to do in Luke 21, and not just give you tantalizing headlines about biblical prophecy, but we want you to be able to understand what these Scriptures mean so that you can tell your friends and your family members who are outside the faith, well, they're aware of certain things that are going on in the world. The world just seems to have lost its reason. In fact, there's a darkness that seems to be coming over our culture, which in many ways was a Christian culture. What gives? Let me share with you some Scriptures and begin like with 1 Thessalonians chapters 4 and 5 or Matthew chapter 24. And you can begin seeing that this was all predicted by Jesus Christ. And this is the opportunity that we can have to extend the kingdom through the teachings of Scripture and not to have Scripture cast aside because of phony baloney predictions, because it's like the boy crying wolf. When it really comes, then nobody pays attention. We don't want to do that. So we don't set dates, but by the grace of God, may God aid our understanding of the Scriptures to see what might be occurring on our horizon. I'm Steve Wood, your host, and thanks for joining me on Luke 21.